All right, Larry Kruger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krueg Show with a little 49er video as John Lynch, Niners general manager, sat down today on the Pat McAfee Show with Pat McAfee. And we'll discuss what Lynch said. We'll let you hear it, and we'll react to the different quotes coming up in just a second. But first, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville. They're in Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. And they do run out. So get there early, get some brisket chili. Tell them that Krueg sent you. We're also brought to you by Claw Daddy Arcades. Claw Daddy Arcades has 3 locations in Southern California. They got spots in Fresno and Modesto. They got a brand new spot opening here in the Bay Area. And they're a great follow on Instagram at Claw_Daddy_Arcades to find that Bay Area location near you. And when you stop by, tell them that Larry Kruger sent you. Big thanks to Claw Daddy Arcades for supporting the Krueg Show. They came aboard during our trip to spring training, and they have stayed aboard thanks to Claw Daddy Arcades for being a proud sponsor of the Krueg Show. And we are brought to you by our friends at Aura, and we'll have a word from Aura in a minute. But first, let's talk a little bit about John Lynch. John Lynch, Niners general manager. Niners are feeling good. All the contracts are done. And Lynch stopped by today on the Pat McAfee Show and discussed a number of things. And let's hear from Lynch. This is Lynch earlier today, and he was asked about, how the contracts in the offseason, and they got them done this year, but they spent an awful lot of money, and it's like, is this what you wanted to do? And to give us your perspective on this offseason. And obviously, these are guys that the Niners. These are not just anybody on the roster. It's their quarterback. This is their star linebacker, who maybe is a Hall of Famer. It's their tight end, who maybe is a Hall of Famer. These are guys that you absolutely don't want to let out the door. But here is Pat McAfee, John Lynch, talking a little bit about the roster today with Pat McAfee.
I want to talk about all the money you gave out, okay? Obviously, Brock Purdy, 5-year, $265 million deal. Everybody thought that was lingering. You get the job done. That's a big number. You were still able to pay George Kittle, Fred Warner, 2 pillars of your team and who have been. How do you balance who you pay when? Because to Schefter's point, this has been the least drama that you've had in an offseason, but it's also like the most expensive that you've had since you got there. How do you balance it all, and how do you kind of put priority on who you pay when?
Well, these guys were pretty easy decisions. Brock's our quarterback, and that was an easy kind of think tank session, like going into this offseason. Is this the guy we want to be our quarterback? We all looked at each other and said, absolutely. And we went to work on doing a deal. And Brock wanted the commitment from us. He has shown tremendous commitment and ability to lead our team. And so it was too much like right, as they say, and we had to get it done. So we did. We were also able to get 2 of our franchise's best players ever. And that's saying something here with the Niners, with Kittle and Fred Warner. Shefty said Bosa's the only holdover on our defense. I think Fred Warner would have a little beef.
Hey, I'll ban him.
But Shefty is on everything. But I know he's got a lot to cover. But Fred, those 2 guys, one we got in the 5th round from Iowa back in our first draft. And in our second draft, Fred Warner came in here, 3rd round pick from BYU. And they've really kind of been the standard for who we want to be as a team. And so to be able to lock those guys up, our 3rd contracts with them was a big deal for us. And so really excited with the work we got done this offseason. In order to get guys done like that and pay them the way we did have to go through a little bit of a transformation. We've had pedal to the metal since we've been here, paying a lot of great players, and that's a good problem to have. Sometimes if I ever complain, I try not to too much. Some other GMs will say, well, I'd love to have your issues. You've got a lot of great players, and we've been able to do that. And but these were core guys. Prior to that, though, in free agency, we watched a record number in terms of finances of free agents leave here, and that's a hard thing because we've always been adders during free agency, but you can't pay everyone. And so to be able to pay this core, to be able to pay our quarterback, we had to watch some really good players go. Fortunately, we had 11 draft picks, and
I want to talk about.
So there you go. That was Lynch talking about the decision to to pay Fred Warner and pay Brock Purdy and to pay George Kittle. And by the way, the 49ers spent $404.4 million on those 3 extensions. Not all of that's guaranteed, but, nearly 300 million of it is. So it's an awful big commitment. But as John said, I mean, what are you not going to pay your quarterback? Oh, we don't want Brock Purdy. You're not going to pay George Kittle. How does that make sense? It's like you got to pay George Kittle. You got to pay Brock Purdy. You got to pay Fred Warner. I mean, you're not going to pay your quarterback. You're not going to pay your future Hall of Fame tight end. You're not going to pay the best linebacker in the game. I mean, as John said, a lot of these decisions made themselves. And so there's no question that the 49ers spent a lot of money in this offseason, but they've got a lot of great players, and they signed players that they wanted to commit to. Now, here's another one from Lynch talking a little bit about the draft. And let's hear John Lynch with McAfee talking a little bit about the Niners' approach to the draft. And here's a little bit of Lynch with McAfee on the draft.
You talk about other GMs saying they'd love to have your problems. There's been other teams, obviously, that have had great success for a long time that have to rebuild their roster. You pay the top end, then you need young guys to hit. The draft is vital in those teams' success. You look at the Patriots for a long time. Obviously, they had to turn over the team a bunch. The Buffalo Bills have had to do this with their team. The Kansas City Chiefs have had to do this. You guys are obviously having to do this seemingly year in, year out. What is it like whenever you go into a draft? Like, you say, ask me in a couple of years if this was a good hit or not, but you're going to need these young guys to show up with the way you're paying a quarterback. Like, that is just a matter of fact. When you're looking at guys to pick them, what is the biggest takeaway? Is it their love of ball? Is it their production? What is your big, kind of point of emphasis whenever you're trying to build or add somebody to your culture?
Yeah. First of all, I tell you that, like, in this job, people ask me, what's your favorite deal? And I think game day, even though I can't do a damn thing, I just kind of say, let's go, boys. Have at 'em. So I love watching our guys compete, but the draft would be second. And I think the reason why is because our entire organization comes together for the draft. And when you're talking, personnel, coaching, R&D, analytics, the chefs who are feeding us, like, everybody comes together and we all know how important the draft. It's the lifeblood of your organization, and so it's really a cool, and it's a good question. What is like at the top of the list in terms of what is a 49er? Who do we want to be 49ers? It's really interesting. Something I find every year. I challenge our R&D guys, our data. The whole world's about data right now. What's the data say? What translates into a 49er better than anything? And it's really who these guys are as people. All these guys, we always say they got to be in the club athletically in terms of a football player. I think we've gone to great lengths to define what we want at each position, but it's their intangibles. Who are they as people? Because as you know, Pat, like, the NFL seasons, they're long, they're hard. Nothing about this game is easy. So it's the people that can endure the times when they're going to get tough, the practices when they're going to get tough. Do we do 2-a-days and all that anymore? Do we go 6-week training camps? No, but it's still a tough sport. It's uncomfortable. And so who has the mental fortitude, who has the physical attributes, but who has those intangibles, the competitiveness, the absolute fear of failure, or just not allowing themselves to fail? That's who succeeds in this league. And that, I don't think that will ever change.
You talk about
interesting. It's interesting to hear Lynch talk about the draft, and obviously the draft is a big part of his job, is to get the draft right. And if we go back and look at the Niners, and he's talking about we got to get the right people and this and that. The bottom line is, I don't know that I would point to the 49ers as the team that is some standard bearer when it comes to the draft. This regime, let's review if we want to review 2017. They absolutely screwed up that draft. Solomon Thomas, Reuben Foster, Akella Witherspoon, CJ Beathard, Joe Williams, Adrian Colbert. I mean, what did they get out of that draft? They got George Kittle, DJ Jones, and Trent Taylor. So if you're going to F up a draft, if you can F up a draft and get a great player in that draft, that lessens the blow of screwing it up. So I mean, that's what they got. They got a future Hall of Famer, I think, in George Kittle. But George Kittle was the 6th draft choice that they made in that draft. And the first 5 weren't worth a damn. Solomon Thomas, Reuben Foster, Ahkello Witherspoon, C.J. Beathard, Joe Williams. That's 0 for 5. That's 0 for 5. And then you hit in the 5th round with George Kittle. And you hit in the 6th round with DJ Jones. So George Kittle saved your bacon in the 17 draft. Otherwise, it's a horrendous draft. All right, let's move to 2018. You can kind of say the same thing about Fred Warner. I mean, Fred Warner was their 3rd-round pick, but look at the rest of that draft. Mike McGlinchey wasn't worthy of the 2nd contract. Dante Pettis, bust. Tarvarius Moore, bust. Street's a bust. DJ Reed, they let get out of there, which he was a good player they let get away. Marcel Harris, Julian Taylor, Richie James. Nobody really came of age there. Richie played a little bit. So, I mean, that's another bust of a draft. You landed 2 players, DJ Reed and Fred Warner. Warner became maybe a Hall of Famer or at least a perennial Pro Bowler, and DJ Reed became good for somebody else. So, I mean, you had a bunch of picks in 17. You had a bunch of picks in 18. And you got Kittle and you got Warner. And then you got a lot of mistakes. You got DJ Reed and DJ Jones. And then it's just filled with mistakes. That's the first 2 years. All right, year 3, they had Bosa and Debo and Greenlaw. So that's a real good draft. That I would say is probably their best draft. Bosa, Debo, Greenlaw, and then Wisnowski. So that was probably their best draft, but they still missed on Jalen Hurd in the 3rd round. The next year, they reached for Javon Kinlaw, and then they took Brandon Aiyuk, Colton McKivitz, Charlie Warner, and Jawan Jennings. Not a bad draft, considering you only had 5 picks. But Kinlaw obviously didn't pan out as a 1st-round pick. Then 2021, you invest 3 number 1s in Trey Lance. He was a bust. Aaron Banks didn't get the 2nd contract here. Trey Sermon was a bust. Ambry Thomas was a bust. Jalen Moore is making good money, but he's in Kansas City. You got Demo Lenore, Hufanga, and Elijah Mitchell on day 3. That saved it. So it wasn't a terrible draft, but it was because you invested so much in Trey Lance, and Trey Lance stunk. The year after that, 2022, another bad draft. Drake Jackson, Ty Davis-Price, Danny Gray, Spencer Burford. Samuel Womack's a player, but he's an Indy, and you let him get away. Nick Sakel's a backup. Kalia Davis is a backup. But you did get Brock Purdy. So really, I mean, you have Kittle saved your bacon in the 17 draft. Warner saved their bacon in the 18 draft. Purdy saved their bacon in the 22 draft. Otherwise, those are 3-0 drafts. 23, the 2023 draft, that was the 2022 draft. The 2023 draft, Jair Brown, Jake Moody, Cam Latu, Darrell Luter, Robert Beal, D. Winters, Braden Willis, Ronnie Bell, Jalen Graham. I mean, jury's still out, but what do you got? You got D. Winters. I like Luter. Moody's still there. Jair's still there. And then 2024, I mean, it's been hailed as a great draft, but what's Ricky Pearsall? Is he good? Renardo Green, I think he's pretty good. Dom Pooney's good. Mustafa's good. Guarendo's good. Cowing's good. So I think the 24 draft was a good draft. Definitely. Jarrett Kingston moved on to Carolina, but he's still playing. Tatum Bethune is starting to play better. So I like that 24 draft. And then this year we'll see. But overall, you know, the Niners drafting has been pretty spotty at best. I would call it spotty at best. Saved by a couple individual picks on day 3. Otherwise, you know, they've got a pretty bad track record when it comes to drafting. All right, let's hear from Lynch again. He talked about Christian McCaffrey. And to me, that's the big question. Is Christian McCaffrey healthy? And McCaffrey told me yesterday that he is healthy. Here's what Lynch had to say about Christian McCaffrey when he sat down with Pat McAfee on the Pat McAfee Show.
And I think last year, the expectations of your team changed like 4 days before the season started. As somebody that drafted Christian McCaffrey in the first round of my fantasy football draft, to learn just a few days beforehand, like, hey, this might be a little bit different year for the Niners. Ty has a question for you, John.
Yeah, John, when that news came out and everyone was saying, actually, it might be a little bit more serious than people thought. Anytime you hear Achilles, even though it was just tendonitis, it kind of made everyone pause, and that ended up kind of derailing you guys' season before it even started with how big of a factor he is in your offense. How's his health going into this year? What have you seen from him, and do you expect to have the Christian McCaffrey of old back this year?
We do, and that's really good news for us. I remember when we started looking at Christian as a trade target. And Kyle and I was letting him coach the team, but I would go down there every now and then, usually when we were traveling, and saying, hey, I think we might have an opportunity. We're going to have to stretch. We're going to have to give a lot, but he's worthy of that. Like, what do you think? And I remember the thing Kyle said. He said, this guy can unlock our offense. And like, what's that mean? Well, it means that Christian running the ball, you see him here. He can bust the long ones. He can get the gritty, tough yards. But then in the pass game, that's where he is not just a runner. He's a difference maker. And if he's not getting the ball, he's attracting attention. When Christian McCaffrey's on a check down, the linebackers aren't going to get quite as deep. Well, what's that do? That it opens it up behind for guys like Aiyuk and Kittle. And so, I think that's what Kyle was speaking of when we talked about potentially grabbing Christian, and that's exactly what he was. And so, yes, it was a tough blow when he wasn't healthy. We had players step up. J.P. Mason, who now has moved on, had a tremendous year. But Christian's different. There's very few needle movers. Pat, that's something your old GM, Bill Polian, and I have talked about, absolute needle movers who change the game. Christian's one of those guys, and he's been that for us, and he's healthy. He's out here. Christian's a guy who can't get enough work, but it's so good for us to see him, healthy. He'll actually speak to our team before we leave. It's like school's out for summer today and our last day, and we always have someone speak about the importance of 40 days away, and Christian's going to give that talk today. And I think there's no one better because the way he attacks it. Kyle says he's like a walk-on who's like one of the most talented players in our league, but he's got that walk-on mentality. His dad was the same way. I played with his dad in college back when I was a quarterback, throwing passes to Eddie McCaffrey, the wide receiver, and his dad was very much the same way. They're maniacal in their work ethic, and I'm talking about Christian a lot because he's an easy guy to talk about.
And I think
so. I look at it as bus riders versus bus drivers. There's a lot of guys who can ride the bus. There aren't a lot of guys who can drive the bus. And Christian can drive the bus. So, yeah, he is the key component. And I asked him, I said, Christian, you had the PCL injury, you had the double Achilles tendonitis. Are you over it, or did you just get a lot of rest and you're just rested now, and as soon as you start playing football again, it's going to all pop up again? And he says he thinks he's beyond it. He thinks he's beyond the PCL injury. He's beyond the Achilles and tendonitis in both Achilles. He thinks he's got solutions and that he's beyond it. And that is great news for the 49ers because they need Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is arguably, one of the 3 or 4 best offensive players in pro football. So you gotta have Christian McCaffrey. A lot of speculation around Brandon Aiyuk. What's the deal with Aiyuk? When's he going to play? Is he happy? Is he not happy? Are the Niners happy with him? Is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? Lynch talked about Aiyuk with McCaffrey. Or with Paul, or with McAfee, I should say. We're getting my McCaffreys and my McAfees confused. But he did talk about Brandon Aiyuk with Pat McAfee, and here is Lynch on Brandon Aiyuk.
But let's talk about Aiyuk. Obviously much different this year than last year. And, Schefter brought up how there isn't a lot of drama or distractions. Felt like that one was loud last year, and I think you would probably even admit that. I think with the way it was being covered, with the way showing up at practice, the way things were going, seemingly leaving, this wasn't going to work out. It was loud. How is that relationship now? And how do you view that time looking back on it with Aiyuk?
Relationship's good. Brandon's been here. He had a tough injury. He everyone saw that play against Kansas City. It was crushing for us because Brandon's such a big part of who we are. Looking back on the Brandon situation, I think every situation that you go through in life, in football, in this job, it's a learning opportunity. I look at things like that, like what could we have done differently to have made that a little more seamless? And sometimes those things are tough. They can be contentious. There's things that I learned that would we have done some things differently? And I think Brandon and I have had these conversations that are there things he would have done differently? Absolutely. But one thing I think in families, you have little spats and then you give a big hug at the end and you work together, and that's where we're at. And Brandon's doing a tremendous job coming back. These guys that are incredibly skilled athletes, they tend to heal a lot faster. And it's kind of incredible how well he's healing. And, he's putting in the work. We're proud of Brandon, and we're looking forward to him being part of this team moving forward. We made a big investment in him. We're proud to have him part of our franchise and, looking for big things from him. And we're going to let him get right and, before we get him back on that field. But he's an important part of this team.
Yeah, him still being there is obviously great for Brock Purdy whenever you talk about weapons. But let's talk.
So there you go. So if there is any smoke behind Aiyuk and is he happy? Is he not happy? Is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? Lynch just put that to rest. He's here. They've had their spats, but he's here, and that's that. All right, let's talk a little bit about the approach after a 6-11 season, because that's also kind of a big thing. What is the Niners' approach? How do they deal with last year? How do they bounce back from last year? And McAfee talked to Lynch today a little bit about this as well. Here's a little bit of McAfee and Lynch on this.
Wait a second. The whole NFL took a hit whenever it was like Christian McCaffrey is not going to be as present as he has been in the past. You just said he's healthy. He's out here. He's feeling good.
Yeah, he's doing great. He's taken a part of every OTA we've had, every offseason practice. I mean, that's one thing. You talked about it. Certainly not our standard. Embarrassing, what happened last year. A lot of reasons for it, injuries to Christian and whatnot. But ultimately, those are just excuses, and we had to own that, and we had to take a hard look and say, where can we be better? And when I knew our players took that to heart was day one of off-season program, and we had 100% attendance, and for something that's voluntary. And that spoke to me that our players understood we fell way short of our standard, and the work's been excellent. And now they got to continue that work away from here. But these are really important weeks, and they're weeks you kind of cringe as a GM, as a member of this, as a player. This is when I always knew I had an opportunity, because when you're all here, I think everyone's on a level playing field. When you leave, that's when I knew, okay, I can make up now because we're on our own. And what are you going to do with that time off? And so I hope our players take advantage of it. I think and have a really good feeling that they will, by the way they've approached this offseason, knowing the opportunity we have in front of us.
Well, Christian McCaffrey is going to give a great speech, too. Yeah, the boy's probably not even going to leave. Normally, last day of OTAs, that parking lot afterwards sounds like a screech fest, and that's not just the players. That's the coaches getting the hell out of there, too, for the break. But after Christian McCaffrey talks, I've heard that the expectation is they're calling for more OTAs.
Nice.
Yeah, that's what I heard about the Niners this year. You mentioned a name there with Aiyuk maybe opening up behind whenever Christian gets those linebackers to get sucked up, sucking up those linebackers. And then you know what we're saying, John. Yeah, former quarterback and safety. You know all about those linebackers getting sucked up in there. Wait a second.
McAfee's a character. But basically, how are the 49er players going to use this time off? Are they gonna train? Or the coaches get away and need to get away and should get away. The players, this is really important that they come in absolute great shape, ready to roll. Let's hear one more from Lynch. And this was, they asked him about the addition of Robert Saleh and what Saleh is bringing to the mix. And obviously, a lot of people are excited to have Robert Saleh back in the building as the 49ers defensive coordinator. And, I think that's kind of interesting. Let's hear Lynch talking about Robert Saleh on the Pat McAfee show earlier.
Your defensive coordinator spot is one that is highly regarded, and you got a familiar face back in the building. Go ahead, Tone.
Yeah, John, does it make it easier for you and Coach to draft those young defenders when you know that Coach Saleh is going to be back running the defense, and it's someone that you're super familiar with and have had a lot of success with? So when you draft those guys that you know they're going to be coached right?
Absolutely. Robert was a big part of this thing. I'll never forget when Kyle and I were first putting this thing together. Kyle was still coaching, and we had a good idea. He was going to be our guy here in San Francisco. And
whoa, sounds like some tampering.
Kyle, asked me, hey, could you meet with this guy Robert Saleh? I think he's got the goods to be a defensive coordinator. They were QCs together at Houston. And I remember Robert came down to my house in San Diego. Linda Lynch, my wife, went and bought a grease board from Staples or something so that I could interview him and he could draw some stuff up. And we sat there for like 3 hours in San Diego. I remember his bald head sweating. We were outside on a nice day, and we just talked ball for about 3.5 hours. And I became a huge fan of Robert Saleh, the person, the communicator, his energy, and then what's in here. And so Robert did great things with us, kind of, put together the foundation of a defense that, became a really successful one for a long time. And then Saleh went on to great things, in becoming a head coach. He earned that opportunity. And, to come back and have the opportunity to bring him back in the fold was huge for us. And it's been a big lift to our building. We got to get back to being a force to be reckoned with on the defensive side of the football. We slid a little bit last year. We got to get that back. We're intent on doing that, and Robert's a big part of that.
Your defense.
So there you go. A little bit about Robert Saleh, and ultimately it comes down to players. You got to have players. Robert Saleh is going to help. There's no question, but what's really going to help is Alfred Collins. What's really going to help is C.J. West. What's really going to help is Mikael Williams. What's really going to help is Upton Stout. What's really going to help is if they didn't lay an egg in the draft and those guys can actually play. Robert Saleh is going to help, but talent is what this 49er team needs. All right, interesting stuff. Kind of a softball, I got to be honest, kind of a softball interview. A lot of softball questions there, but that's how you get an interview like that. Thanks to Pat McAfee for letting us use that content, but as I said, I thought it was kind of a softball interview. Interesting stuff, though. A lot of interesting dialogue there. A lot of interesting answers. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krueg Show. Thanks to Claw Daddy Arcades. And now a word from our sponsor, Aura. Have you ever typed your name on the internet and seen all of your private information is online? Are you tired of receiving tons of spam calls from random numbers? Are you receiving more and more of these as time has gone on? Well, that's where Aura, the sponsor of today's show, can really help you out. Data brokers sell your information to scammers and spammers and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, your email, your home address, all your records, your health records, who your relatives are. It's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it also protects me from hackers who could use the information to help them access my social media accounts, my bank accounts, or any other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats I can't see. I get other features like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more without having to download several different apps. It's really easy to set up, and best of all, I get everything at one affordable price. I value my privacy, and I value yours. You can go to the link in the description to start your 2-week free trial. And thanks to Aura for being a proud sponsor of The Krueg Show. Thanks to all of you for supporting The Krueg Show on YouTube.